If you fell into Jupiter, you would never hit the ground. There would be no final impact, no hard surface, no moment where the fall ends. You would keep descending, deeper and deeper, through a world made of storm, pressure, darkness, and heat, until the idea of falling itself stopped making sense. And the strangest part is this: Jupiter looks calm from far away, beautiful even, but beneath those soft bands of color is a planet so violent, so large, and so alien that a human body would be almost meaningless inside it. Tonight, we are going there, not to land, but to fall, slowly, layer by layer, into the largest planet in the solar system, and to ask a simple question. If you fell into Jupiter, what would actually happen to you? From a distance, Jupiter does not look like a place you could enter. It looks complete, finished, like a giant marble hanging in black space. Cream, gold, orange, brown, wrapped in smooth bands that almost look painted. If you had never learned what Jupiter really is, you might imagine clouds on top and some hidden surface below them, a place you could eventually reach. But Jupiter is not built like Earth. It does not wait for you with oceans, continents, mountains, or land. It is a gas giant, though even that phrase can be misleading, because Jupiter is not just a ball of harmless gas floating in space. It is a deepening planetary abyss where the atmosphere becomes thicker, denser, hotter, heavier, until the neat categories in your mind begin to fail. Gas, liquid, sky, surface. On Jupiter, these begin to blur. And that is what makes the idea of falling into it so unsettling. On Earth, falling means something. You fall through air towards solid ground. There is a destination. Even if it is fatal, there is an ending. But on Jupiter, there may be no clear ending at all. Only descent, only transition, only a long surrender into a world that was never made for bodies like ours. Before you even begin to fall, Jupiter already overwhelms the imagination. It is the largest planet in the solar system. More than 11 Earths could fit across its diameter. Over 1,000 Earths could fit inside its volume. Its gravity is immense. Its magnetic field is monstrous. Its atmosphere is layered in jet streams and storms so huge that some of them could swallow our entire planet. And then there is the Great Red Spot, a storm so famous that even people with no interest in astronomy have seen it. A vast red wound in the side of Jupiter, turning and turning, year after year. For centuries, humans have looked at that storm and wondered what kind of world could produce it. The answer is simple. A world with almost no mercy. A world driven by pressure, motion, chemistry, and scale beyond ordinary intuition. Jupiter does not behave like a larger Earth. It behaves like its own category of reality. And that is why falling into it is not just a bigger version of falling through a sky. It is entering an environment where your instincts stop helping you, where up and down lose their familiar meaning, where weather becomes architecture, where clouds become regions, where depth itself becomes the threat. Imagine now that you are approaching it. Far behind you, the sun is smaller than it looks from Earth. Ahead of you, Jupiter slowly swells in the dark. At first it seems still. Then, as you come closer, you begin to notice motion. The planet is not calm. It only looked calm because you were far away. The stripes are not markings. They are bands of atmosphere, racing around the planet at enormous speeds. The pale zones and darker belts are not decoration. They are dynamic systems, rising gases, sinking gases, shifting chemistry, endless circulation. And already, before you ever cross into the upper atmosphere, you would feel the psychological shock of it, because Jupiter does not look like a place where a human should be. It looks like weather that became a planet. or a planet that never finished becoming one. It is both beautiful and wrong. And as it fills your vision, one fact becomes impossible to ignore. There is nowhere to land, only somewhere to disappear. That is the first truth of falling into Jupiter. Not that it would kill you, but that it would erase the comforting structure of how you expect a world to work. No shore, no cliff, no plane, no impact point. Only a deepening atmosphere with no visible promise of an end. And yet, from orbit, it is almost hypnotic. The clouds curl and stretch in long, elegant lines. The colors are muted, almost gentle. The planet rotates quickly, completing one full turn in under 10 hours. That rapid spin helps shape its banded appearance. Everything is moving. Everything is under tension. But from a distance, it still feels serene. That is one of Jupiter's most deceptive qualities. It hides violence inside beauty. It hides force inside softness. It hides danger inside scale. And that is why the idea of falling into Jupiter grips the mind so easily. Because it feels impossible. But not immediately. It feels survivable, at least at first glance. And that illusion matters. Because the beginning of the fall would not feel like death. It would feel like entry, like passing into cloud, like moving through atmosphere, like starting a descent you do not yet understand. But Jupiter is not a place where understanding arrives before damage. On Jupiter, the environment acts first. Explanation comes later. And soon, you would begin to cross the threshold between looking at the planet and being inside it. That is where the real fall begins. And that is where Jupiter stops being an object in space and becomes a world around you. The first thing you might expect is a dramatic moment, a sharp boundary, a line between space and atmosphere. But Jupiter does not welcome you that way. Its outer layers do not begin with a clean cinematic border. They thin outward gradually, fading into space. So your entry would feel less like crashing into a planet and more like slipping into something enormous. At first, the upper atmosphere would seem almost delicate, a haze, a thinning veil of gas. Sunlight would still reach you. Above, space would remain visible. Below, the cloud tops would stretch in all directions like an endless landscape made of motion. And for a brief moment, the experience might even feel strangely peaceful. This is one of the unsettling things about Jupiter. Its danger is not always immediate in appearance. The first layers can seem soft, muted, distant. But softness on Jupiter is often only scale hiding force. As you descend farther, the atmosphere thickens. Hydrogen and helium dominate, the same basic ingredients found in stars, but here arranged into planetary layers instead of fire. Mixed within them are trace compounds: ammonia, water vapor, ammonium hydrosulfide, chemicals that help create Jupiter's pale zones, darker belts, and shifting cloud decks. These are not clouds like the ones above Earth. Not really. Earth's clouds drift over a world. Jupiter's clouds are part of the world. They are not decoration in the sky. They are the sky. And as you continue downward, you move into them. The light changes first. The bright, distant clarity of open space begins to soften. Contrast fades. Shadows blur. The atmosphere scatters the sunlight into a dimmer, stranger glow. Colors lose their clean edges. Everything becomes more diffuse. The sensation would be deeply disorienting. On Earth, even in storm or fog, the mind expects orientation, a horizon, a ground, a fixed reference point. But on Jupiter, there is no familiar geometry to rescue you. Only layers above and layers below. Only movement, only thickening air. Then come the winds. Jupiter's atmosphere is famous for its jet streams, powerful east-west bands that race around the planet at extraordinary speeds. Some winds near the cloud tops can exceed hundreds of kilometers per hour. In certain regions, far more. And these are not local gusts. They are planetary systems, persistent, structured, immense. To fall into Jupiter is not only to descend, it is also to be seized sideways, dragged into flows larger than any storm system on Earth. The atmosphere here is not passive, it is muscular. You would not cut cleanly through it. You would be taken by it, turned, rolled, shaken by invisible currents moving with a force your body could never negotiate. Even now, before the deeper lethal layers, the human sense of control would begin to collapse. You would realize something important. This is not a fall you can manage. This is not a sky you can navigate. This is an active environment, already deciding what happens to you. Around you, the cloud structures would grow more complex. Towering formations, dense patches, regions of turbulence where gases rise and sink in slow, colossal exchanges. Some areas would seem smoother. Others would feel broken, chaotic, folded into storms within storms. And somewhere in the larger distance, perhaps far beyond your immediate path, the great red spot would still be turning. That ancient storm is not just a mark on Jupiter. It is a reminder of duration. A storm on Earth is temporary. Jupiter's great storms can persist for years, decades, even centuries. That changes the emotional feeling of the world. It no longer feels like weather. It feels like a permanent condition. As you move deeper, the temperature remains complex. The uppermost atmosphere can be extremely cold. But Jupiter is not cold all the way down, far from it. Descend enough, and both pressure and temperature begin to rise. This is one of the reasons Jupiter becomes so dangerous so quickly. It is not only one threat, it is a stack of threats. Winds, pressure, heat, chemistry, disorientation, scale, and still, the most psychologically disturbing part may be the absence of a surface. Even now, as the atmosphere thickens around you, the instinct to wait for arrival would remain. Surely there must be something below. Surely this descent leads somewhere solid. But Jupiter keeps refusing that expectation. It keeps giving you more atmosphere, more density, more depth, as if the planet were built entirely out of continuation. At some point, fear would change shape. In the beginning, the fear is dramatic. You imagine impact. You imagine explosion. You imagine the sudden violence of entering a giant planet. But deeper inside Jupiter, the fear becomes quieter, stranger, more helpless. Because now the terror is not what is about to happen in one instant, but what is already happening continuously. You are inside a place with no human scale, no human path, no human destination. And the deeper you go, the less your body matters. The atmosphere presses more insistently against you. The motion around you becomes harder to read. Visibility worsens. The idea of up begins to dissolve into memory. There is only immersion now, a full environmental takeover. Jupiter is no longer beneath you, it is around you. And soon, in the layers below, it will begin doing what giant planets do best. Not simply surrounding a body, but overpowering it. Because the next stage of the fall is where Jupiter stops feeling like weather and starts feeling like pressure made into a world. At some point, the atmosphere stops feeling like something you are moving through and starts feeling like something that is closing in on you. The descent continues. But now, every meter downward carries weight. Pressure begins to build. Not suddenly, not in a single crushing moment, but slowly, relentlessly, in a way the human body was never designed to experience. On Earth, pressure changes are familiar. You feel them in your ears on an airplane, or when you dive into water. But those changes are small, and your body knows how to adjust. On Jupiter, that adjustment never comes, because the pressure does not stop increasing. It does not level out. It does not stabilize into something survivable. It simply continues, deeper and deeper, until the idea of balance disappears. At first, the effects might seem subtle. A growing heaviness in your chest, a tightening sensation around your body. Breathing becomes more difficult, not because there is no atmosphere, but because the atmosphere itself is becoming something your lungs cannot handle. Hydrogen and helium surround you, but they do not sustain you. And as the pressure rises, your ability to expand your lungs fades. Each breath becomes smaller, more strained, less effective. Your body begins to fight, quietly at first, then more urgently, then without success. And still, the descent continues. The temperature begins to rise as well. Jupiter is not just a cold gas giant. Beneath its upper layers, it grows warmer, then hotter, then hostile in a way that does not resemble fire, but overwhelms the body just as completely. The combination of pressure and heat creates a condition that is difficult to imagine. It is not like standing in a hot room. It is not like diving deep underwater. It is both and neither. Because here, the environment is not just surrounding you, it is compressing you from every direction at once. Your body is not built for this. Human tissue depends on a narrow range of pressure and temperature. Outside that range, structure begins to fail. Cells cannot maintain their shape. Fluids behave differently. Gases inside the body compress. Spaces that should exist begin to collapse. At a certain depth, survival is no longer a question. It becomes a timeline, a short one. But even here, Jupiter does not offer a single dramatic moment. There is no instant where everything ends cleanly. Instead, there is a gradual breakdown. Breathing fails, circulation struggles, consciousness begins to fade. Not as a sudden switch, but as a slow dimming. Thoughts become harder to hold. Sensations blur. The difference between inside and outside, body and environment, begins to dissolve. And still, the descent does not stop. This is one of the most unsettling truths about Jupiter. Even after the human body can no longer function, the fall continues. Because Jupiter is not reacting to you. It is not responding. It is not even noticing. It is simply existing. And you are passing through it. Deeper layers press harder. Temperatures rise further. The environment becomes less like atmosphere and more like something approaching a fluid state. But not a fluid you could float in, not a fluid you could swim through. A dense, hot, crushing medium, where the distinction between gas and liquid begins to lose meaning. This is where human intuition breaks completely, because we are used to boundaries: air above, water below, solid ground beneath. But Jupiter replaces those boundaries with gradients. There is no line you can point to and say, this is where it becomes something else. Instead, everything transitions, slowly, continuously, until the categories themselves stop being useful. At this stage of the descent, the human story has already ended, but the planetary story is just beginning, because below these crushing layers, Jupiter becomes something even stranger. Not just a deeper atmosphere, but a different kind of matter altogether. And that is where the fall continues, into a world where gas is no longer just gas, and where pressure does something extraordinary to the simplest element in the universe. It changes it. Far below the visible clouds, beyond the violent winds, beyond the crushing pressures that would have already ended any human experience, Jupiter enters a region that challenges even scientific intuition. Because here, hydrogen, the simplest and most abundant element in the universe, begins to behave in a way that feels almost impossible. Under normal conditions, hydrogen is a light, invisible gas. It drifts, it expands, it fills space easily. But under the immense pressures inside Jupiter, hydrogen is forced into a completely different state, a state known as metallic hydrogen. This transformation does not happen suddenly. There is no sharp boundary, only a gradual shift, as pressure increases to extraordinary levels. At these depths, hydrogen atoms are squeezed so tightly together that their electrons begin to move freely between them. And when that happens, the substance starts to conduct electricity, like a metal. It is no longer a simple gas. It is no longer something we encounter in everyday experience. It becomes a vast, dense, electrically active ocean, hidden beneath thousands of kilometers of atmosphere. This is one of the most remarkable features of Jupiter. Not something visible from space, not something that defines its color or its clouds, but something that shapes the planet from within. Because this layer of metallic hydrogen is not still. It moves, slowly, massively, continuously. And as it moves, it generates Jupiter's immense magnetic field. A magnetic field so powerful that it extends millions of kilometers into space, far larger and far stronger than Earth's. This invisible structure surrounds the planet, interacts with charged particles, creates radiation belts, and influences everything in Jupiter's environment. It is one of the reasons Jupiter is not just a large planet, but a dominant force in its region of the solar system. And yet, if you imagine descending into this layer, there is still no moment of arrival, no surface, no boundary you could stand on, only increasing density, increasing pressure, increasing transformation. The idea of falling into Jupiter continues to resist completion because there is nowhere to stop. Only regions that become more extreme, more unfamiliar, more detached from anything the human mind can easily picture. Below the metallic hydrogen layer, scientists believe there may be a core, but even that is uncertain. Some models suggest a dense, rocky center. Others suggest something more diffuse, a core that is partially mixed into the layers above it. Not a solid sphere, but a gradual blending of materials under immense pressure. In a sense, even the idea of a core becomes ambiguous, just like the idea of a surface, just like the idea of a boundary. Jupiter does not organize itself according to the categories we expect. It does not divide neatly into sky, sea, and land. Instead, it exists as a continuous structure, where matter changes form as conditions change, without clear edges, without clean transitions, without human-friendly landmarks. And this is what makes Jupiter so difficult to fully understand, even for scientists, because it forces a different way of thinking, a way that accepts gradients instead of borders, processes instead of places, transitions instead of destinations. If you imagine the fall continuing, deeper still, past everything we can model with confidence, you reach a point where knowledge fades into uncertainty, where measurement gives way to theory, where the planet keeps its deepest structure hidden. And that hidden structure is part of its nature. Jupiter does not reveal itself completely. It does not offer a final layer that explains everything above it. It simply becomes more complex, more compressed, more energetic, until even our best descriptions become approximations. And somewhere within all of this, the idea of falling finally loses its last connection to human experience. Because falling implies direction, it implies movement toward something. But inside Jupiter, there is no clear down in the way we understand it. Only increasing pressure, only increasing density, only deeper immersion into a world that does not behave like a world we were meant to enter. And that is where the meaning of the journey begins to change. It is no longer about reaching the bottom. It is about understanding that there may not be one. That Jupiter is not a place you arrive at, but a place you disappear into. If the fall could continue, if something could move deeper still, beyond everything we have described, then Jupiter would become even more difficult to imagine. Because at these depths, pressure is no longer just a force acting on a body. It is a force that defines the state of matter itself. Everything here exists under conditions that reshape behavior at the most basic level. Hydrogen does not behave like a gas. It does not behave like a liquid in the way water does. It exists in forms that only appear under extreme compression. And these forms do not sit quietly. They move, they shift, they interact with heat rising from the planet's interior. Heat that Jupiter still carries from its formation, because Jupiter is not cold inside. It is a world that slowly releases energy, a giant body still radiating warmth into the darkness of space. This internal heat drives motion, convection, slow, massive circulation of material, rising and falling over unimaginable distances. Not in waves you could see clearly, but in gradual, powerful currents that reshape entire regions over time. If you could somehow remain present within this environment, you would not experience it as motion through space. You would experience it as space itself moving around you. Upward and downward would lose their meaning. There would be no stable direction. Only gradients, only differences in pressure, temperature, density. And those differences would guide everything. Not choice, not control, only physics. At this point, the idea of a journey begins to dissolve, because a journey implies progression, a path, a sequence of places. But inside Jupiter, there are no places in the human sense. Only conditions that change continuously. Only transitions without clear markers. And somewhere in that slow, continuous change, the concept of deeper becomes abstract. You are no longer moving toward something. You are simply existing within increasing intensity. Even time would begin to feel different. Not because time itself has changed, but because there are no events to anchor it. No landmarks, no clear transitions, only gradual transformation. Moments blend, experience stretches. The mind, if it could still function, would struggle to measure anything. And this is where Jupiter becomes something more than a physical environment. It becomes a challenge to perception, a place where human ways of organizing reality stop working, where categories fail, where expectations dissolve, and in that dissolution, something quieter takes their place. Not understanding, but acceptance. Acceptance that this is not a world built for interpretation. It is a world built from forces, from pressure, from motion, from energy. And those forces do not explain themselves. They simply act. Deeper still, knowledge begins to fade. Not because there is nothing there, but because what is there becomes harder to describe. Models become uncertain. Predictions become broader. The planet keeps its deepest layers hidden behind physics that is difficult to recreate, even in our most advanced experiments. Jupiter does not offer a final answer. It offers increasing complexity, increasing compression, increasing abstraction, and at some point, the question is no longer, what would happen to you? Because the answer has already passed. The more interesting question becomes, what is Jupiter, really, at its deepest levels? And the answer is not a single thing. It is a continuous transformation, from gas to liquid-like states, to metallic behavior, to something we are still trying to understand. A planet without clear edges, without a final layer, without a simple ending. And that is where the fall continues. Not as a story of survival, but as a story of immersion into something that does not need to be understood to exist. In the end, falling into Jupiter is not a story about impact. It is not a story about reaching a surface or surviving for a certain number of seconds, or even about the exact moment the human body would fail. Those things matter, but they are not the most important part, because Jupiter changes the question itself. On Earth, we think of falling as something that moves toward a conclusion, a ground, a collision, an end. But Jupiter removes that structure. It replaces it with continuation, with depth, with a descent that does not resolve in a familiar way. And that changes how the experience feels. The beginning of the fall is dramatic. There is curiosity. There is scale. There is the shock of entering something enormous. Then, there is resistance, wind, pressure, heat. The body struggles, fails, disappears. But the planet does not stop. The environment continues. The layers continue. The physics continues. And that is the quiet truth of Jupiter. It is not a place that reacts to you. It is a place that exists, completely independent of you. Your presence does not change it. Your fall does not interrupt it. Your story is a brief event, inside something that has been unfolding for billions of years, and will continue long after. From far away, Jupiter looks calm, a soft sphere of color, floating peacefully in the dark. But inside, it is motion without rest, pressure without mercy, energy without pause. And yet, there is something strangely peaceful about that, because Jupiter is not chaotic in the human sense. It is not random. It is not confused. It is consistent, relentlessly consistent. Everything it does follows from what it is. There is no hesitation, no contradiction, only structure, at a scale too large to see all at once. And that is what makes the idea of falling into Jupiter so compelling. Not just the danger, not just the scale, but the way it reveals the limits of our thinking. We imagine planets as places. Jupiter shows us that some planets are not places at all. They are processes, endless, continuous processes, without clear boundaries, without final destinations, without simple explanations. If you fell into Jupiter, you would not reach the bottom. You would not arrive anywhere. You would simply pass through layers, each one more intense than the last, until the idea of arrival stopped meaning anything. And in that sense, Jupiter is not a world you land on. It is a world you enter and never truly leave. A place where falling does not end, because there is no single point where the fall is meant to stop. Only a gradual merging into something larger than any human experience can comfortably hold. And maybe that is the most important part of this thought. Not what would happen to your body, but what happens to your expectations. Jupiter asks you to let go of edges, to let go of surfaces, to let go of endings, and to accept a different kind of world. One that does not wait for you, one that does not explain itself, one that simply exists in its own scale, its own rules, its own quiet, unstoppable way. And as you imagine that descent, layer by layer, pressure by pressure, darkness by darkness, something else becomes clear. The fall into Jupiter is not terrifying because it is violent. It is terrifying because it has no clear conclusion, no final moment, no definitive end, only continuation, only depth, only the slow realization that some places in the universe are not meant to be reached, only entered, and once entered, never truly understood.